Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Coach Better Coach Talk. As you know, we're endeavouring every day and every week and every month to get more and more interesting guests. The last few have been super interesting with a taste of youth development in the US, youth development in the UK, and tonight, absolutely delighted to get on a gentleman who I've been fortunate to know for a long time and is certainly, without a shadow of a doubt, a world-leading youth developer with so many experiences both in professional game, on the men's side and the boys' side. So we're absolutely delighted to welcome Dan Micciche with us tonight. Dan, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. Thanks for having me, Mark. Nice to see you all.
Yeah, absolute pleasure to have you. As I mentioned, Dan's world leading in the aspect of youth development with all his experiences. And normally at this point, we'd ask him to talk about where he's been, his journey. But Dan, being such a humble guy, I thought it would be only fair to give a quick overview of Dan's background. So Dan's first job in the professional space was at Milton Keynes Dons. For those of you who aren't familiar with English football, they're a team in the third tier, so two below the Premier League. And when he started, it was an academy in its infancy. Only a year old, a small club trying to compete with the likes of your Arsenals, Chelsea's, and more established Spurs. And over the course of a few years, Dan developed one of the most unique youth development programs England's ever seen, developing players the likes have gone on to play in the Premier League, the Football League, and all over Europe, more notably the likes of Sancho and Dele Alli. From that, Dan was headhunted by the Football Association, and off he went to the FA to work as a coach of the under-15 team, where he played an integral part in developing their well-renowned DNA, supporting the players on their first England experience in that under-15 category. And for those of you who are working in the EPPP at the moment, you'll be fully aware of the Advanced Youth Award. So an award that pretty much every single coach involved in professional youth football in England has been through at some point. And Dan, again, was integral in not only bringing that award to its start point, but then delivering over the first couple of years as the key practitioner. And then more recently, Dan's been involved with one of the biggest clubs in the country in youth development, starting as the under-15 coach at Arsenal Football Club, and then spending over a year as the head of the PDP phase, so responsible for players from 18 to 23. And as we know, with the success of Arsenal's first team at the moment, Dan, please forgive me for saying you've had a big impact in supporting the development journey of these young players and integrating the new playing philosophy and the philosophy of Arsenal to promote younger players from within under Mikel Arteta. So Dan, congratulations on a wonderful career so far. And to get stuck into it, what would be great, I think, would be based on those experiences and probably what feels like 50 years, but 15 years of experience at every level of youth development and senior football. For the listeners, what would be the sort of big three learnings you've picked up over that time?
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. And I'm going to be humble. It was, it's how I've been brought up, and I couldn't have achieved anything in my coaching career without really good people around me, and more importantly, players who are very open-minded to learning and developing. So I've been very lucky. I'd say in terms of the learnings, I think back to John McDermott, who I worked with at Tottenham before my time at MK Dons, and I remember him doing an in-service. John McDermott is now the technical director of the Football Association and did an amazing job at Tottenham across 15 years. And I learned a lot from him. And I remember he did an in-service called Rewiring as Coaches. I mean, this would have been back in 2006, something like that. And what he was basically saying was you can't stand still as a coach. And what he was doing in 2006, he wasn't doing in 2002, for example. So, and I think about that now, that it was a really good message to listen to as a young coach. And everywhere that I've worked, I've never tried to pick up where I've been before and take it into the next club or federation, wherever it might be. So we couldn't pick up MK Dons and put it into the FA. You're in a different organisation, different culture, different people, different vision. So you have to do what's right for that context. So I think that's very important, and I think the best in the industry do that, and we would have seen that on numerous occasions. People have, I'm sure have done it far better than I have, but it's a really important message, I think, for all of us, to be adaptable for wherever we work next, as well. So it's adapting to the organization you're going to work in, but it's also keeping up with modern trends and modern times. So for example, when I was at MK Dons, technology was nowhere near what it is today. So we have to embrace technology. Data was nowhere near where it was. Data was just coming in really, more on a sports science side, and it's kind of in its just getting going really. And now with data analytics and analysis and different metrics that we look at, that's constantly evolving, and if you don't keep up with that as a modern coach, you're going to be left behind. And there's a lot of bright minds out there that I've come across over the years, and they're the ones who have got a thirst for knowledge. We ask players to have a thirst for knowledge. We have to, as well as practitioners. So I'd say, just to recap on that, my first one is being adaptable to the different places, where different environments you work in. My second one is keeping up with modern times. And my last one really would be about challenging the status quo. So I've always tried to work in a way that I make a difference, because I'm there for the players. I want them to feel inspired. I want them to believe that they can achieve things that nobody else believed they could achieve, including themselves. So I remember going to MK Dons and a few people saying to me, "Don't think you're going to go there and produce any players." I remember leaving MK Dons and going to the FA, and somebody saying to me, "Don't think you're going to go there and out-possess Brazil and Spain," etc. So you get those things that you don't forget, or I certainly don't forget, and I don't let them sort of comments put me down, because that is what the industry we're in. We're surrounded by social media now. Social media isn't going to go away. Social media has a lot of benefits, but also we need to have a thick skin in this industry as well, because we are going to get criticized as players and as practitioners, but we have to have a belief in what we're doing, and anything's possible. We've seen that before with certain organizations to have that slogan. My personal upbringing in terms of that was, I had a cousin who was diagnosed with an illness when he was 16 and ended up being paralyzed from the neck down. And he ended up learning to paint with his mouth, and ended up having an art gallery and selling paintings. So for somebody, for myself, to see somebody like that who could achieve something even though they couldn't move any parts of their body, that was very inspirational when I was growing up. So I always link that into football and say, right, if somebody can paint with their mouth, nobody can tell me that you can't play out of a high press, for example, or you can't play in MK Dons' first team when you're 15. So I've tried to use those lessons throughout my life, and for myself as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, that last bit, incredible story in terms of, and linked into that then, how have you, because you're right, from a player and a coach's perspective, listening to the noise, and obviously football, as we know, is a game of mistakes. How do you be that person who keeps players positive, keeps players feeling very aspirational towards what they could potentially achieve, given all those challenges around them being aspirational?
Yeah, I think it comes from your personality. Are you empathetic? Do you see the journey? Do you see the mistake as losing 3 points on the Saturday, for example, or losing a game of football, or costing you a goal? Or do you see it as an opportunity for that player to learn? Do you see that mistake being a moment of brilliance in a month's time, a year's time, 5 years' time? And a lot of the research that I've followed has been around players' journeys, and not only seeing them with my own eyes, but also just reading up on them. And the amount of players that have come through the system that have been discarded at a young age, somebody hasn't believed in them for whatever reason. It might be maturation, it might be positionally, or it could be a number of reasons. But a lot of the times, you know, mistakes, there's a reason why a mistake has been made, and it might not even be the player who's on the ball. You know, it might be for what's happening around the ball. It might be that the opposition did really well. But I think it's our job as coaches to have the solution in our mind. We might not give the player the answer there and then. We might not give them the answer at all, because we all know self-correction is the most powerful form of learning, because then it's come from within. But if we haven't got the solutions in our head, or we go and search for that solution ourselves, or ask the right question, for example, what did you see there to the player? What were you thinking? What could you do next time? Because something might not work just because they maybe didn't move their feet quickly enough, for example, or they didn't scan. And they're all things that you can coach. But often, you know, we've all seen it and we've all said it, that sometimes players get written off, you know, quicker than you'd write off a car, you know, and it's but the rewards are huge if we believe in them. And you know, it's a lot of it, I think, comes from within. Do you have empathy? Do you see the journey? Do you see what they were trying? Do you know what the solution is yourself? So me personally, I've got my own playing style database for how teams play, how my teams play, but also individual players in different positions. And I do that as a process for myself, because every time I watch a game of football, I learn something new. It doesn't matter what league it is. You know, over the weekend, I've watched games from France, Italy, England. I watched the MLS final, and there's always something that happens in a game where, particularly off the ball, and it could be defensively as well, that you think, or it might be a set play. I was watching a Premier League game this morning, and I saw a set play that caught my eye. So then I made sure I got it. I managed to get it from a different angle, and I just store it, because then I might use that at some stage, or encourage players to. Because sometimes you work with players who are maybe got scars from the industry, particularly first team players that I've worked with, and that's a different challenge in terms of getting them to believe. But also sometimes youth players, because it might be from their upbringing that whoever's been around their support network has told them you can only do X, not X, Y, and Z. So we've got to have some different, try and get them to think differently and use their imagination. And then over time, what I find is those players, and the right ones as well, the ones who want to be here, they come to you and they start sending you over, you know, online. We'll email you a clip and say, could we try this set piece next week? I saw that. And sometimes they don't even end up in a goal, but they're seeing movements off the ball. Yeah. So that's when you know you've got a real culture of learning and developing and belief, like you say, because the players then drive it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that when they do step over to that ownership piece, where they're taking responsibility for their own learning, suddenly you become a facilitator, not the leader of it.
Yeah.
You know, good things can really happen. And I've actually seen that in your environments at every age category. And linked to your experiences, Dan, I thought what would be a super way forward, and we discussed this before, is obviously from your experience at MK Dons, without it being a blank canvas, I'm not sure anyone ever gets a blank canvas, but very much had the opportunity to put your own stamp on it. So, you know, the program's in its infancy, it's a year old, you know, not doing so well. Right. What can we make to significantly change the direction of travel? Same with England. You know, you took it coming at a time when there was a lot of changes at the hierarchy, a new DNA, a completely new way of working. I mean, that line you used around why can't an England team outpossess a Brazilian team? That's the type of thing that changed. And then obviously at Arsenal, you know, from where it was to the time you spent there to implement your own ideas within the club philosophy and club model. So I wanted to sort of set you a scenario really and sort of paint that picture that based on your experiences, if if you were to take a director of coaching, technical director, executive director at junior club academy tomorrow, where would you start to implement your ideas? And I know you've prepared something, so I'll share that with everyone now. But it'd be great to probably get a feedback in terms of, on day one, where does it start? What does it look like? And based on your experiences, what you've done so far. So I'll hand over to you to talk through the presentation, and we'll just jump in at some point with some questions. That's okay, Dan?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it's impossible to go into all the detail on for the amount of time we've got together tonight. But I'll give a brief overview on this, and also I think the people that I've worked with over the years who have done this very well, they've been fantastic leaders who haven't had all the answers themselves and have recognised that, and they've done it. When you do it together with others, it's a lot more powerful. So, for example, at Arsenal, I was part of a small group of phase leads, some very talented people who we were tasked with putting a lot of the philosophy into practice and in practical sense, along with the academy leadership team. And, we were trusted to do that. We did it together, and then it was cascaded down. And then the age group coaches started to really take ownership, and the head of coaching did an amazing job there of really making the coaches feel part of what they were doing. But what he did was he did it within some boundaries. Otherwise, full ownership, the thing can go all over the place. So if you have a clear way of, if you have a football vision, for example, so the leader sets that vision, we are going to be X, and then everything can drop out of that quite simply. But if you go to the next slide, please, Mark, I'll explain and give some ideas, really. So so this is just an example. So in terms of a football and playing philosophy, some people call it a game idea. What is the playing identity? And then what are the principles of play within the zones of the pitch? So take as an example, you're playing for your in possession philosophy is to dominate possession, and you're doing that to create chances and score goals. Now, a lot of the current statistics are no different really to what they were in the past, which is most goals are scored within 5 passes or less, and teams generally use possession to make the opposition run and to rest in possession, and generally score their goals on transition. However, utopia is, can you dominate possession, and within that you're creating good clear-cut chances. So within this example here, there's principles of play in the zones of the pitch. This is just an example. So one of them being create and use the free player as an example. So now you're getting some detail in terms of what you're going to look for on the pitch. And if you go to the next slide, please.
Dan, we'll come to this now, but
yeah.
that information there, like it's first thing that smacks to me is the simplicity. But
yes.
From your experience, how would you implement that? So would it be you share everything straight away with the staff and the players? Would you break it up and chunk it up? How does that work from there? And this might link in.
I think it depends again on where you work and what the context is. I mean, you might find that a lot of this is in place already and you're just going to tweak. You might find that, like you said, there's a blank canvas was what your example was, and you're being brought in to put this in place. So I think a more powerful way to do it is getting a group of people in a room and saying, right, if our football vision was to be this, so think about teams that are possession based, that are very good at creating chances to score goals. What do you see on the pitch? What is happening? And can you give me some examples? And you might set them some tasks that they bring to a workshop, and then you get them into small groups. And then as the leader of this this scenario, you then can collect that and then you can choose which parts you want to use. Like I said, our head of coaching, the way he did it very well was he had meetings before a meeting. So he saw all of that being presented prior to the final meeting. Yeah. So he knew what was coming as well. So again, that's where you can give people ownership, but within boundaries and within a framework. And it becomes a lot more smoother. And also with all these things, not everybody's always going to agree on everything. And Dan Ashworth, who we worked with at the FA, had a really good saying where he said, the art of negotiation is nobody leaves happy, but everyone leaves satisfied. So if somebody leaves happy, somebody's going to be the opposite end. But when you're doing these kinds of things, if you leave satisfied, you've done really well, because it's about everybody and not just yourself. So I think that's a really powerful way. I've always been very lucky that the people who have led me have generally brought me into, impact change. And that's been the remit. So if you're supported from higher up, you then have that psychological safety that you can put in place X, Y, and Z. And if that's communicated to everybody, then everybody knows that's what you're there to do. And thankfully, everywhere I've worked, people have embraced that and come on the journey. And I always think it's important as well that you don't think you know all the answers, and you want to learn from other people, and you want to use their ideas as well, because they might see something you don't see. They might have certain video clips that you've never seen before. I learned an incredible amount in every place that I've worked at, around a lot of really talented people. So I think that's the best way to go about it. If it's a context where there's minimal amount of staff and they're quite inexperienced, then I guess they're looking up to you to say, come on, tell us.
Yeah.
And I've experienced that as well, where I've had that myself, when I was starting out, and I worked at Tottenham under John McDermott and Chris Ramsey and Alex Inglethorpe. These guys were far more experienced than me, and I just needed to be told and learn through, like our, anyone who's got children listening to this, our children as well learn from being told at times. It's not all guided discovery. It's not all Q&A. Sometimes it's, we're doing this. And then for myself, I think the important is the why. So we're doing this because, and then it's up to you then to really get up to speed and try and catch up with the person who's running this philosophy. Because we used to have this saying with the players at Arsenal, and we used to have it was like tongue in cheek, but it was like chapters. So if a player had been out injured, I'd say to them, you're still on chapter 3, we're on 5 now. And it would create this thing of, right, I need to catch up here, and the playing style's moving on, and and I'm here. And of course we would work together to get them up to speed and etc. But that's when a philosophy is evolving and moving forward. Definitely. And I think
sorry,
go on.
Sorry, go on, you carry on.
No, go on, I'm done.
Well, I think we're both of us with young children. I think we definitely appreciate the command style in the last few years.
Yes, exactly.
But I think
depends what you're commanding, I guess, because I think
good point.
I heard it on the TV the other day. They were talking about Graham Potter. They were asking Graham Potter about English coaches, and he was saying historically they scream and shout, and he's quite got a different approach. And I was listening to that thinking it depends what you're screaming and shouting about, because if you're screaming and shouting and restricting the player, then that isn't personally what my belief is. But you might be I've seen screaming and shouting where it's you are driving the players so they can do more and give more, whether it's effort, whether it's running with the ball. You're commanding them to run with the ball because they don't believe they can, or they don't maybe, like I said, maybe they've got someone else in their ear saying no, just get it and give it. And you're saying, no, you can be that midfield player or that centre back who drives. And that's the screaming and shouting. But it depends what it is, and again, that's where I think with coaching, everything's all about context, and there's no right way to do anything. Is it right for that context and that individual and that environment at that time?
Definitely. No,
Which
it's
makes it quite complex.
From experience, you have an incredible way of working out where that line needs to be in relation to framework versus freedom, and how it's never fixed. It's never we're 90% framework, 10% freedom. We've got a rough idea of where we are at this given time based on the context, i.e. 60-40, for example. But you're a magician, Dan, at adjusting it based on what you're seeing. And I suppose linked to that framework piece, we can see the goal tree example now. Do you mind just giving us an example of, we've seen the philosophy, how that breaks down into more tangible, I suppose, manageable, measurable areas?
Yeah. So I think this is something which can then give the group of players that you're working with a framework for the season. So what is our vision? Why are we here? So I've experienced different ones of these. Some of them have been, for example, to be unplayable with and without the ball, and inspire the next generation of players, as an example. So then that's always your go-to. That's what gets you up in the morning, and you try and set the bar as high as you can. Obviously, anything with goal setting, which is what this is, you want things to be realistic and specific, etc., achievable. But you can always adjust these things as well. And then you can break that down into your season goals. So that might be finishing in the top 3 in a league, for example. It might be to have the highest possession stats in the league. It might be creating the most chance in the league. It might be something to do with them as people, developing as people off the pitch, as well as on it. It might be something to do with leadership. This can be framed as people see fit, and then breaking the season down into blocks. So block 1, and those little squares are fixtures. Okay, what you could also do is take that block 1 out, and those little squares could be months in the year. So, but what you're doing is you're periodizing the season, and that could be periodizing them in terms of mesocycles, which is sort of 6 to 8 weeks, or it could be more micro and it's more week to week. That's down to you. And then in the white box, you can then put in priorities for that block 1. So what is it we're going to do in block 1? We are going to build belief in our playing style, and we're going to have a reputation right from the off with whoever we play against that we have a clear identity. So by the end of block 1, we have a clear identity in terms of how we play, and then that again sets the benchmark in terms of what everyone's trying to achieve. It might be you're in a cup competition, and in block 1 we want to qualify at the group stage for this competition. And then what WITTW is what it takes to win. And then you put some things in for the different moments of the game. And of course, set pieces are also extremely important in the modern game. So again, you might have for in possession as an example. We want to dominate territory in every game. We want to have X amount of possession in the opposition's half. We want to have X amount of touches in the opposition's box in each game. Out of possession might be to do with winning the ball as high as possible. And I always try and put things in those boxes which are measurable, which I'll show in another slides, because then it helps us to make this subjective but also objective as well. And then on the bottom line, again, it's just an example of a slogan that you might want to put on there that fits your context. And the one that I've put on there, which is quite important to me, is about never being too high and never being too low, because we all know what this industry is like. Things can change very quickly. So you know, it's really important that as leaders and as coaches, we stay as level as we can, as much as we can through the good and the bad times.
Sure. And before we jump in the video, do you mind giving us a specific example potentially of what might have gone in a block one from one of your clubs? So, you know, you've walked through the door of this club, you've met with the staff, you've got probably an outline of what your philosophy and methodology might be. Players are arriving next week. What might be something that you'd be looking to put in that first block as just one potential objective or target?
Yeah, I think something just as having the next 6 weeks mapped out in terms of your planning on and off the pitch could be an objective for block one. So if block one is going from, for example, the start of July till the middle of August, that all our scheduling is in place, our fixtures, our training objectives, even our training sessions for the first few weeks, one-to-ones with players, everything is geared up. Because again, what I've learned over the years is that planning is a competitive advantage, good planning, because what it then does is it allows you to focus on executing your plan and focus on the players, rather than you're working with the players, but you're constantly coming up with what's coming next. If you can know what's coming and then what's coming after that and what's coming after that, it really gives you a good direction of travel.
Yeah, for sure. And linked to I suppose, this next piece around how are you then building belief in the playing style. I'll play the video and just be great to get your thoughts and how it looks and what we're about to see.
Yeah, I've just giggled there actually, because I've just noticed on the bottom left it says Jackarini. So I mean, it's the video doesn't play great online, unfortunately, but just to talk you through it the best we can. So the context of this is it's 2-1 to the Blues, and it's the 90th minute, and the player circled has just run the fullback inside to create a free player. So again, going back to those principles of play before, what it's done is that slight bit of movement, it's created time and space for the wide player to cross the ball with more time to then deliver their cross. And the reason why it says Jackarini there is, though I'm going to sound really old now, but in 2016 he scored the first goal for Italy against Belgium in the Euros, and what he was very good at, that midfield player, was making that type of run. Not specifically like that one. If you watch the goal, which you'll be able to find anywhere on YouTube or anywhere online, is he actually continues his run in behind and scores, and Bonucci dinks it in behind. But that's just an example of that type of movement has planted a seed for me, and it's created a football reference in my brain in terms of how you can either score a goal yourself or open up a passing line for somebody else. And you know, we would call it that with the players. And again, it was what the reason I did that with players. People might say, oh, you know, they don't even know who he is, etc. But that's the whole point, is what you're doing is you're, in a sort of hidden way, I guess, you're sending a message out to the players in terms of watch football globally, you know, and also about us, that we watch the football globally, because I could find a player from the Premier League who does that movement. I could find a player at that specific club that I was working at who could do that movement. But by using an example from many years ago and a place for a different country, it just plants some seeds in terms of, if we're expecting the players to be students of the game, are we? So that builds belief, that goal, and we need those moments as coaches, because it's the last minute and we could have put the playing style in the bin and done something totally different. And again, there's nothing wrong with doing that. It just wasn't our way. And if we hadn't have scored from that moment, at least we wouldn't have scored doing it our way, and then we can take it back to the lab, if you like, so to speak, and say, right, what could we have done? They were in that clip there. I think the opposition had got into a 5-4-1, and people will say that's very hard to break down, but there are ways to break it down, as you've seen there. And it goes back to, again, my upbringing and what I've experienced, that nobody can tell me on this call or anywhere that you can't break down a 5-4-1. You know, what you need is a model of work. So that move there, the players would have worked on that repeatedly. And then what this then does is, when we reviewed the game and you put paint on the clip, then it becomes even more powerful. And what you wouldn't have been able to have seen on that clip, the player who was circled pointed to the wide player. So he was telling the player on the ball, miss me out, play to him. You know, and that's very skillful. When we talk about skillful players, that's skill. And that's skill without touching the ball. You know, that those sorts of moments, you know, I've had thankfully many of those over the years, and when they happen, I latch onto them, you know, and they're always ones that I can go back to, and I go back to them in this sort of context. So again, working in different environments is very different. There was no way in a million years I could have done this at MK Dons when I was in the academy. I could have done when I was in the first team, because we didn't have this facility. But then you go to work at a different organization and you look around and they've got the screens with the pen. You've got really skilled analysts who can one take workload off you, and you can build a football relationship with another member of staff in terms of what they see and what you see. So this isn't all me. This is a collection of people. But what this was born out of was COVID, because we weren't able to do team meetings. So we could easily have said, okay, there's no team meetings, so we won't do team meetings for 18 months. But what we came up with, I worked with a really good coach at Arsenal called Josh Smith. We both come up with this idea where we can do the team meetings remotely. So we would prepare the presentation, and then I would talk through it. He would record me delivering. He would help me with the clips. He would do a lot of them himself. And then we'd go through them together. And then I could draw as I'm talking through the clips. And then that got sent to the players. And then we'd set them some homework. And then we would track players' comments. And we would come back to them and say, that was an excellent point you made there. Can you tell the group that? And we'd have a green and amber red system in terms of those of them that were doing this work, because it was the only solution we could think of at the time. And it's something which we didn't do every week once restrictions were lifted, but we found a model kind of through adversity, if you like.
Yeah. No, it's interesting that you've obviously spoken a lot about the planning piece. Yeah, how important it is to plan, what type of advantage that can bring. We all know about the delivery piece, and obviously now the review piece. And it's interesting how you've adopted like modern technology, evolved with the game to reinforce important messages, engage with the players, even when they're not right in front of you or able to have a physical conversation. And I can imagine that you had a sort of mix in the group. Some players really bought into that and were really communicating via an app or via their WhatsApp. And other players were a little bit quieter, but as you know, you're catering there for pretty much everyone within the group, whatever stage they're developing at, whatever maybe their learning preferences are.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of the feedback that was received was the benefit of this, rather than a traditional team meeting, was when you do it this way, they can watch that video in their own time. So they might watch 5 minutes of it, then go and have a cup of tea and then come back to it. So they're doing it a bit more on their terms, if you like, as well. So, and as we know, in a team meeting, you might explain something and some of them might not be taking it in. Whereas on here, they can rewind it. And it's actually a good reflection for yourself if you're going to stand up in front of a camera and talk about clip X, clip Y, clip Z, then you need to try and make sure that your information is going to be as close as as accurate as possible, and be open as well to the players adding to this as well. But then what if you then transfer this into training as well? So another way that you can check that players are trying to take on board certain key concepts. And again, it links back to how do you put in a philosophy. If the video is linked to your principles of play, linked to how you want to play with and without the ball, you're praising certain things players are doing, which others will then look at and go, okay, that's really important here, and I know why. And then you take it into the next training session. So you might say, yeah, what was it, lads? You set them up saying a goal kick, and you might say, show me what I said in the video on last week in terms of playing out from a goal kick when they're pressing with a front three. Can you show me, please? And then you're just doing it in a random situation, and then it's another way, and then you're taking it back onto the grass, which is important because obviously that's where the game is played. And these tools here, I guess, are a vehicle to help consolidate learning and accelerate and impact performance, which is the whole point of anything we're trying to do.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's super interesting that, because I can imagine that you've also got players then can take the video away. They might share it with their teammates. They can have a little talk about it. I can imagine both those players seeing that clip would be, look, that was great we did that. Whereas obviously in a meeting format, very difficult to get that interaction.
Yeah.
I suppose then going back to the overall implementation, we can see an example now of probably linked to that goal tree, really, how you objectively measured the progress you were making in relation to the goal tree and the game model.
Yeah, I mean, I was really lucky to work with Tony Strudwick at Arsenal, who, he definitely is world leading in his profession. And I don't use that one lightly, but we created this together where we thought it was important that at the end of each mesocycle, which was 6, 7, 8 weeks long, however long that mesocycle was, to reflect.
Emily, come in.
To reflect as staff in terms of our work.
Yeah.
So it's not just the players that are reflecting. If anything we're asking the players to do, we're going to do ourselves. And basically the way that worked was different departments would present for 45 minutes on evidencing what they'd achieved in those 6, 7, 8 weeks, linked to the vision of the Academy manager, and they would color code it as you can see on the screen. So they might not have started something that they'd set out to do, and that's okay. And they'll explain why. There might be something that they put in place that is at risk of not being achieved.
Yeah.
Something else is progressing, something else is on track. And then they would show evidence for that, why that's on track. Because obviously everything's always ongoing. So then they would show supporting work. And then it would also give them an opportunity to share what challenges they're facing. And then, again, as the leaders, we can then hopefully support them. Again, goes back to that empathy, understand it from their point of view, and then try and help them find some solutions. But the main thing is just creating a culture of reflection, because I think sometimes in this industry it's very fast paced, and we don't build in time into our schedule and program just to breathe and reflect and also celebrate great work that's going on. Because sometimes you can just keep going without taking stock and saying, and then what other people will do is they might give you an idea to improve it even further as well. And finally, on that note, it helps you to plan for the following year, because if you collect your work and keep a record of your work, it can avoid duplication in the future. None of us want to be repeating things on a consistent basis. And the better we can be at recording our work and tracking what we're doing and creating systems where our work is in certain places, like I said, you can pass it on to others, and you can also repeat it the following year. Maybe not exactly the same, but maybe 80%, and it saves you a lot of work.
Yeah, for sure. I think what you've done great is that a lot of the time these philosophy methodology meetings can be very much, let's have a chat in the classroom, tick the box, and then maybe forget about it for the next few weeks and months. But it just shows that if you put formal processes in place, how you can tick boxes, check along the way, challenge along the way, to make sure you're actually living up to some of the things that you talk about.
Yeah.
And then linked into that, Dan, be good just to get a little overview of, we've got the philosophy, we know how we want to play, we understand how we can potentially plan it and review it. Be good to get your overview really around your personal training philosophy in terms of how you'd summarize how each session looks.
Yeah, I mean, again, I used COVID as an opportunity as well. I said to myself, as much as I'm going to have some time here with, during obviously a really difficult time for us all and a terrible time for a lot more people than myself. What can I gain from it other than seeing more my wife and children? And I created my own game model. So this is a screenshot from that, in case you can see at the bottom. It says methodology, and there's a return arrow because I made the document interactive. But what it done for me is it just gave me an opportunity to play an idea, leadership, etc., player profiling, and happy to share this slide with you. So I always try and make things as memorable as I can. So, for example, my personal playing philosophy is the 3 A's: to be attacking, aggressive, and adaptable. Obviously, there's a lot of detail that falls under that, but if I need to explain it to somebody in 5 seconds, I can. And the same goes for, and I think that helps with players as well, because players can relate to things a lot easier if they're memorable. And they tend to say the power of 3 in terms of that. So in terms of how the brain operates. So it's for training. Mine is player specific, game specific, style specific. So is this training session specific to the players that are in this session? Is it developing their strengths? Is there input from players in terms of what we're doing? Am I asking them, how was that exercise for you today? Do you think that the area sizes were okay? What did you think of the duration? Because they're in it, and there are certain players that are, could be a future England manager. So, I'm going to tap into that knowledge. And then better training, not more training. So not necessarily, it's not how long you train for necessarily. Of course, you have a physical periodization model, and you'll have different days where you train for longer and shorter times, but it's what you do in the session. For me, that's important, as opposed to how long it's for. In terms of game specific, is it a match tempo? Ball rolling was something that Dan Ashworth and Matt Crocker put in place, and Gareth Southgate at the FA when we were there. They use 70% ball rolling. I've got on here 80. It's a very similar thing, but I think it's a really good concept, because what it means is they're playing. And going back to the modern technology side, if you're framing up training before, i.e., a meeting with the players before training, this is what we're doing. This is exercise 1. This is exercise 2. This is why we're doing it. These are the objectives. Once they're out there, they shouldn't need that much explanation.
Yeah,
and then you can get more coaching points out post training using video. So then they're playing. Pitch geography is this exercise in the area of the pitch where it would happen in a game, and short transition time. So like a football match is 2 halves of 45 minutes. If they're having a drinks break every 5-10 minutes, is that realistic to a game of football? Style specific. So like I said, pre-training video to link the concepts. So that video clip we saw earlier. If you want that movement in the training session, yes, you might have constraints in the session that bring out that movement, but you can also show a clip of that to say, think about this movement when we're doing this exercise, and this is the reason why. This is what it does. Everything with a ball is something that I've fundamental of sport is football, and the session being competitive, because I think competition drives motivation. I've done things where there's player leaderboards that we keep track of throughout a season. I think they're very good. I think just keeping the score. Steve Holland was a master at it, Gareth's assistant at the FA. Everything he did, he would keep score, tell the players what the score was. And I think that's, again, if we're working with the right group of players, they want to win, whatever it is. So, and then because if you don't have competition and then you get to a game and you think your players lack a winning mentality, then I'd ask, well, what was your environment like during the week? And obviously you can do competition as well, where they're in the same teams for the whole session and the score carries over for different exercises as well. So you keep that motivation going throughout the session. So there's lots of things, obviously, you guys who are listening will have lots of ideas as well on this. But fundamentally, that's my training philosophy. And as it says at the top as well, it's integrated. So that means the physical and the psychological and the technical all linked to the tactical concept. Everything's interrelated. It's periodized, whether that's the football themes, whether that's the physical concepts or the physical categories, as I call them, and it's specific. So it like that list shows.
Yeah,
it's got to happen in a game of football. It's got to be relevant for the players that I have, and it's got to be specific to our style. And you might even link it as well to the opposition you're playing against, if that's the context you work in.
Definitely. No, I think I can imagine it also gave you a really simple tool to discuss with coaches practice design.
Yeah.
By simply repeating what you just said around, is it player specific, so on and so forth, then the proof will be in the pudding in terms of the design or the actual delivery, whether those 3 boxes were ticked.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I remember when I worked at Crystal Palace, when I first started out, I was working with a really talented coach called Paul Holder, and the group of under 10s that I'd started working with, I was well out of my depth, and I wasn't challenging them enough. So I asked him, could you come and work with them? And he got them doing things in 15 minutes, which I couldn't get them to do in 3 months. And when he walked off, and I said to him, what is it you did there? And he said, we played football. And he said, if it's got attacking, defending, and transition in it, then you can't go far wrong, because that's the game. And it was really, it's a lot more complex than that. But that was a really important lesson for me many years ago, and I try and use that as a springboard as well.
Yeah, we can see now all the various different exercise and ways of working it, and I can imagine that within all of them, that is still apparent that you want to be getting those 3 key meshes across.
Yeah, exactly. So again, I think one of the things that's really important and is, again, a modern approach. It's not something that maybe I was doing myself when I first started out, but I've done it more and more as I've gone along, is a common language and common terminology, because you have more people now working within a club or within a federation than we had certainly when I was at MK Dons. So the more that you can be aligned in terms of exercise, everything you do, but even with exercise types. So when you talk about training, for example, everyone's got a common way of working, and everyone knows what that is as well. So there's no grey areas. And then what it helps then in terms of players is when players move from coach to coach, players will start to use this language as well, and they'll have an understanding of what the exercise is and how it operates as well. So because they might be future coaches as well. And again, this model isn't something which is for them all, and we know that they're going to play for different coaches and managers. So, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a clear way, because at least when they leave us, they can say, yeah, there was a clear model there. It was X, Y, and Z. Now I'm working with this coach. I've now got to adapt to how he works. But at least when I worked there, they knew what they were doing more often than not. A key thing on here was we moved away from isolated warm-ups, hence why warm-ups isn't on here, and we moved towards activation drills. And what that was developing a physical component but linking it to a tactical theme. So it'd be with a ball, and what it was really good at for the physical performance coaches was they had to have the football references as well, because everything they delivered was linked to the style of play, as well as what they wanted to get out of it physically. And what we were able to do was build a real library of these exercises, which then allowed us to plan far more efficiently for future sessions.
Yeah. And I think we're, incredible detail, and shows how much work goes on behind the scenes to deliver sometimes a 90-minute training session. But just conscious that we've probably got a few people watching, listening, that are in the grassroots space or have got clubs that cater for the elite end, but also at somewhere in that club, they're then working, supporting players and coaches in the grassroots space. So specifically around the principles we're talking about, the player, game, style, and having some form of drill library, would you say that's relevant and applicable as well to that grassroots space, although as a much maybe dialed down version?
I think so. I mean, at the end of the day, if you for people who are working in grassroots, I have so much respect for you, because you'll be volunteers and you'll have your own daytime job, and you'll be rushing from work more often than not to get to a training session, and you're doing it for the love of the sport. And you may have one of your children in that group as well, so you're doing it because you want to be a fantastic parent. So I think in order to allow you to deliver that session to the best of your ability, to have something in place where doesn't require you to be spending hours on end planning, to spend hours on end reinventing what you're doing, I think is really important, and will allow you to enjoy it more as well. Rather than, I can imagine at times you get to a venue, the group that are on before you have run over time. All your players are there waiting for you. You haven't even set up yet. And then you're trying to set up, and they're kicking balls around, and then you find that your numbers have changed. There is a lot of things going on to deliver that session. So I think the more that you can have a system in place, which are your go-to for whether it's specific practices or guidelines. So when I have an odd number, when I have an even number, when I only have X amount of space, when I only have one goal that I can use, but I'm working on this theme, here are 2 or 3 practices that I can use, and all I've got to do is tweak those. Because at times I think we're all guilty that we think we've got to give the players a different exercise every time we see them. But sometimes doing the same thing is actually got its benefits as well, because they know it and they're not having to spend 10 minutes remembering rules and understanding it. And by the time they get it, it's finished, and then they're never going to do it again. And all it might be is you just build on that type of exercise. And I think it's crucial. I used to be a coach who was very, very off the cuff, and it worked for me to a certain extent. But then when I started working at places like the Football Association, where planning was king and you were expected to plan and show it, and it was very important because we didn't have the players for very long, I then got into a groove of working in a different way. And I can still work in my old ways of similar to what I did on Saturday when one of my children had a game of football and the head coach was making the goal, putting the nets up. So no one was there to take the warm up. So I went and took it for him. And I didn't plan that was even going to happen. But because I've been in that scenario many times, I was able to do it. But where I'm much more comfortable with now is drill library, exercise types, field size matrix, periodization model, etc. Because I think there's so many moving parts to a training session and to deliver a playing style now, that and individual needs of players, and having support staff around you who you got to think about who's responsible for what, and they want to know as well what they're doing. You know, I've never worked with a member of staff that doesn't like knowing in advance what they're about to do. And I've been guilty of that in the past, where I've assumed that because I can do things at the drop of a hat and last minute, that other people will. But then again, that's something that what I've had to learn: have empathy and understand why everyone's different. And a lot of people are, you look at those psychology profiles with the colors, personality types, and a lot of people are very process driven and like to know, I'm doing this. So I try and now let my staff know what they on a Monday, know what every training session is for that week, to the detail of, on Thursday in part 3 it's going to be X and you're likely to have this amount of players. Of course that might change on Thursday morning, but it's just giving them that heads up, and at least they can start thinking about it.
Well, it's absolute sense, and ultimately all of it is to build a great experience for the players.
Yeah,
and all of those processes just support with exactly that. Just really conscious. I want to get stuck into. We've talked about, you've taken over this club, you've started to develop a game model, a way of playing, a methodology. You've shared with us how you'd sort of implement that, how you work with the coaches to bring it out of them as well as your own ideas. Also, the process you put in place to review it and just check and challenge you on track even. How do you then bring that back to those individual players? So we've got this big game model. We've got an idea of how you want to go about things. There's the framework. How do we then go, right, well, we've also got a load of individuals here. They've all got their own personality, identity, and bring that out of them within that game model.
Yeah, I think what I have found very beneficial the last few years has been trying to keep the football language as objective as possible. So so when I say that, what I mean is you can see that on the football pitch. So I try and stay away from things like, the players showed great character on Saturday, and the reason being is because it's going to take, I've then got to explain even more what that is, or the players showed great spirit. I'd rather talk about what it actually was they were doing. So when they showed great character, were they pressing higher? Were they winning more aerial duels? Were they putting more crosses in the box or attacking crosses? So now we're talking about football actions. So that's the first point. The second one is linking the football actions to different positions on the pitch. Okay, so that's creating player profiles, and player profiles and position profiles can be, I think, very different, because for a certain position, if you were to say in this position you do these things, then say it's a holding midfielder, for example. The holding midfielder currently at Newcastle does some things which I haven't seen many holding midfielders do since Andrea Pirlo retired. So then you're going into what type of player are they? So I think it depends what people's preferences are. Are they position profiles? If they are, is it a player with different characteristics, or is it you're zooming it in more on the player? And then what you then do with those actions is they're linked to your playing style, okay? And the zones of the pitch, because how a certain team plays. Let's say, for example, we'll take Arsenal, for example. They're playing a 4-3-3 at the moment, and it's inverted wingers, and it's a striker who plays predominantly as like a false nine. So when I'm watching them yesterday against Chelsea, particularly the first half, Zinchenko's playing inside the pitch. So that for that playing style, for that fullback needs to do that to overload centrally. Whereas at a club in, I'm not going to say a league because it happens in every league, it might be another club where that fullback never does that at all. He might never touch the ball in his own half. And when he gets the ball, his job is to cross the ball as quickly as he can, play the ball in the channel, and other than that, defend. Yeah. So it's got to link to your style of play. Otherwise, the players are going to get completely confused. So there's no point having a big list of football actions because it looks good. Just have them specific to how you're going to play and what's required of the players in those areas of the pitch. And then you might need to add the X factor element to what that individual brings to that area of the pitch. So, for example, he might be a set piece specialist, and that set piece specialism might not be in your football action, but you just add it for that specific player, and because you want to harness that and grow that as well. And then what then happens is that those actions then transfer into a player's individual plan.
Yeah, it makes sense. And then I suppose linking those individual plans, we've seen the goal tree before.
Yeah.
We'll jump straight to an actual example, if you don't mind, in terms of how would you use these with the players? Where does this process start? So I'm one of your players.
Yeah.
I've just walked through the door.
Yeah.
We've had a couple of training sessions. Just walk us through how it goes from I'm just training with part of the team to I've now got like a really objective, accountable learning plan that I can start to take ownership with.
Is it possible to go to the one before, Mark, which was blank?
Of course I can.
Yeah, this one here. Yeah. So first of all, prior to meeting with the player, I would plant some seeds. So on this here. So if we take the concept that we looked at before, which was the team goal tree that we looked at, and you can do the same with staff as well to have the same thing. That's really important because then the staff are practicing what they preach. But you can do the same with a player. So you could say, okay, we're going to meet next week. I want you to come to that meeting and tell me what your dream is. What's your vision? What is it you want to achieve in your career? I also want you to think about 3 targets for this season. Okay, that link to that vision. So then, and then they're already going to come with things. They might even send you they might even send it to you on text, WhatsApp, whatever it is, whatever you're able to do, given the age of the player. They might write it down for you. They might tell you it beforehand. And then you might have that ready for that meeting. So it's already in their plan. But also what you're going to do is take them on a journey of, they're going to have a season purpose. So if their dream was, which we'll see on the next slide, Dream X, the season purpose has to link to it. So the season purpose is getting us one step closer to achieving that vision. Our season targets are the layer underneath. And then below that is, what is our evidence that we're achieving that? So these are the things that we're going to show this throughout the season. And that's our evidence that we are achieving target 1, 2, and 3. So a simple one before we go on to the next slide. If my son says, yeah, one of my targets at school is I'm going to always be on time. The evidence is, okay, at the end of the year, let's see if the school report says you were 100% punctuality. So there is a number attached to it. And then underneath one of his process will be, right, I'm going to always be on time because I'm going to make sure I get up at 7:20, whenever time he wakes up. And I make sure we'll be in the car for 8 o'clock, etc. So, and as soon as I get to school, I'm walking straight to my lesson. So that's his process for that, in very, very simple terms. But in terms of the next slide, in a football context, this is an example that I've done with a player before. So this was blank when I met him, other than where it's got the red, amber, green, and brown boxes. That was those years were in, but not the leagues that he intended to play in. But I asked him before, what's your vision? He said, I want to play 100 Premier League games. Now, of course, we can all be very critical of this and say, why 100? Why isn't it 101? By when? There's lots of things that you can critique this, but you got to be careful with that with players, because some of them will go, why are you even telling me, asking me then? It's just 100. They're happy with that. And of course, this can evolve. He might play 100 within the next 3 years. So then you're updating anyway. So it doesn't really matter. Obviously, within ourselves, we know there could be more detail than that. Are they starts, for example, as well? Or is it 1 minute in each of those games? But that's his vision and that's his dream. What's important is it's his words, because this is his. And if we want him to buy into it, or she, sorry, I haven't been using she on this call, then it's got to feel like theirs. So then my questions are, and our job is, okay, you want to play 100 games, and actually it was done for this. By when? And this individual said by 2024, 25. Okay, so we'll work backwards from that. We're now in 2020 to 21, and you're playing in League One. Where are you going to be in League One next year? No, I'm going to be in the Championship. Okay. And then after, yeah, I'll be in the Championship for 3 years. Then I'll be in the Premier League. If I get there sooner, great. But that's my target, 5 years. Okay, so season purpose. And this player said, I want to start 25 league games, League One games. And bearing in mind, this player was about 18, I think. So that's very high, 25. So that was his season purpose. So he felt if he starts 25 League One games that season, he'll get a move. And he did. Because it means he's playing well. Because the team he was in was a good team. So he's playing well. He's only 18. That will normally get you a move at that age. Or he might move up there with his current team. And then target 1, 2, and 3. Again, I was to ask him. He's a midfielder. okay, so in order for you to start 25 league games, what are you going to have to do in your club? And he said, I need to be the best box-to-box midfielder at the club. So that's what target 1 says. I said, okay, what's the evidence going to be that you're doing that? And then that's what's in the white boxes. I'm outperforming other centre midfielders. I'm getting positive feedback from my coach, etc. And then underneath that was, what are the football actions going to be? So what's the process? What am I going to see on the pitch? And he said, well, you're going to see me winning tackles. You're going to see me winning headers. So these are all things we can measure. You're going to see me retaining the ball. And then that was just repeated for the other targets. So target 2, what else are you going to do to get 25 starts? I'm going to create and score goals. So then my part in that equation was, okay, how many goals? How many assists? And he put there 5 assists and 2 goals. And then I said, how? And then they're listed, how he's going to do them. And then the final one was around physical performance. So it's a bit of a journey to take them on, and that can take as long as it needs to take. But then it's bespoke to them, and it's something which you can track either with video clips or with data or with conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
And no two are going to look the same.
Yeah, no, without doubt. And yeah, that detail is incredible. And I think you've got a great example as well of how you've really dug into all that process. So the players really contributed, they've taken some ownership. And then an example now around how you've also created what you call a dumbed down version, really, and then how you integrated that into your training plan. So how again did that come about in terms of moving the game model to making it more bespoke to the player? And then we'll obviously see some examples on training.
Yeah, so again, there's certain things that require, I think, a lot of detail, and then certain things which can just be really simple and can sort of get you from point A to point D as in a sort of more simplistic form. So take this example here. The round circles on the pitch, the goal is at the bottom of the screen, shows goalkeeper, a back 3, 2 wing backs, a diamond midfielder and a striker. Player A is an outside centre back, either right or left side. Player B is a wing back, right or left side. Okay, doesn't matter. And so some of the things, again, going back to the football actions that player A is going to be doing, not all of them, but some of the things will be interceptions, because we're possession based. So we want them to intercept so we can then attack. We don't want them, as much as we can, to either tackle and go to ground or kick the ball out of play. That's just how we want to play. Another thing they're going to have to do is make passes to first, second or third lines. So although we're possession based, it doesn't mean that everything is a 5-yard pass. And for this individual to progress in the game, they've got to have a variety of passing techniques that allows them to do it. For player B, one of the things they might be doing is getting free, so into out runs. So or it can be out to in runs. It doesn't really matter. They're 2 different things. But into out runs is you start inside the pitch and your run goes from in to outside. And obviously out to in is the reverse. And then crossing. So low driven crosses and narrow crosses is an example on here. So then if you go to the next part here for this training session, this is an example now for a wing back. So it's a positioning drill. So this would have been done at the start of training. And the player circled on the left is going to make an out to in run. So he starts outside the pitch and he runs in on the shoulder of the fullback. And the mini goal is there as a, that's the area where he would be crossing the ball. Okay, so it allows then the goalkeepers to be working separate, because that's important that they do that as well as work with the team. But what this allows us to do with the design, we're working right and left side. You're getting lots of repetition of passing of a specific type of movement, and then you can. This one was progress. So the other goals that are there on the penalty spot, that was for more cutback crosses. Okay, and this was these types of exercises were what we referred to as positioning drills, and we had a number of very skilled coaches at this type of work. And my role in this session, I'm overseeing, and we've got a coach working with the players who are on the right hand side and some working on the left, so they're zooming in on the detail of their work.
And I suppose that in that practice as well, you've not just got the wing back working on something that is individual to them. You've got other players in a team, I can imagine, who are ticking boxes in relation to some of their superpowers or areas of development.
Exactly, because you've got players who, because you're working right and left side, they're using both feet. You've got different types of passing. You've also got there would have been with certain players as well. We would have started the practice with the ball in the air. If they needed a header, so you might throw the ball in the air. They might head it to you, and then you play. So they're just getting 5 or 6 headers. If it might be a centre back, for example, you might do it where the practice starts where they intercept in front of a player, and then the practice starts with an interception. So you're making that more bespoke to them as well. The player who plays the threaded pass for that run could be a player who's got that in their plan. I mean, you'll see there actually in the big goals are 2 bread mannequins in the corners. So another way we would have used this practice as well, with goalkeepers or without, is aim to hit the mannequins in the corners. Yeah. So again, that's something where I'm sure in people who are listening's training sessions at times, a goalkeeper doesn't turn up, or a goalkeeper is unavailable, is injured, etc. There's always things you can do. Of course, you can put mini goals in the goals. You've got different types of finishing nets now that are available, that are very useful. But we'd also use those mannequins in the goal with the keeper in the goal, and we might say things like, if you score, you get a point, but if you score and hit the mannequin, you get 2, because we're trying to encourage them to hit the corners. And like Mark's asking there, that rule might only be for a couple of players in the practice. It won't be for everyone, or it might be for a specific player that their goal only counts if it hits the mannequin. So we normally wouldn't do that. We would say, for those couple of players there, maybe a player on each team, if you hit the mannequin when you score, you get 2. Doesn't apply to anybody else. It's just for those 2 players. Because in their plan might be composed, might be finishing in the corners, for example.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously then the impact that type of practice can have in a game as well, in terms of that work you're doing.
Yeah, so this is that shape we're talking about. They're in a 3 diamond 3. Pause, please. So this player here who receives here, what he did really well was hold his position. So what was happening in that previous practice as well, the one who played that through pass, that mannequin was positioned specifically where he is now. So you're on the outside shoulders of the opposition. And then the player circled is doing the exact movement you just saw. So they start outside the pitch. Yeah, play, please. And then on a trigger, which for these 2 players was, as soon as that midfield player started slowing down, he knew that was his trigger to go. He plays that cross and we finish. And again, of course, this doesn't happen every week, but when it does happen, celebrate it, because they have transferred the learning, and it's something which, when the moment is right, you would like them to repeat that if they can.
100%. Now, look, I mean, incredible insight, mate, in terms of the level of detail you go into, and also I think it's nice for everyone to know that you can apply these principles at whatever level, just on a slightly bigger or smaller scale.
Absolutely. Like I said, I went to watch my son play his 9 on Saturday for his grassroots team, and I helped out with the warm up, and didn't know I was going to do it until 10 seconds before. They had 1 goal, 7 players, and a couple of footballs, and I just went back to my philosophy that what I showed you before, and I said to myself, right, okay, I want to do something here which has no cues, because that's something that I don't believe in. Or if there is a cue, I mean, I know I'm contradicting myself a bit, because those positioning drills had 1 or 2 players in a queue, but it was 1 or 2, and they're there for very, very short space of time, a few seconds. But long queues, because I think for behavior, for one, that can affect behavior when there's long queues, because boredom creeps in, but also they're not playing. So it was right, no queues, and it's going to be competitive, and it's going to have attacking, defending, and transitioning. And all it was, 4 attacked against 3 towards the goal. The 3, if they wanted to attack, they had to win the ball and pass it to me. Once they did that, it flipped. So now the 3 attacked against the 4. What encouraged is they had to get out to the ball, because what I noticed, as soon as we started the practice, they would retreat to the goal. And the invasion game is go and get the ball. So encourage them to press, and it encouraged transition as well, because when they won the ball, the attackers had to counter press to stop them passing to me. Or when the ball went out, I might have dropped the ball to them, and then everyone had to react. And by the time that the game started, they had a bit of a sweat on, but they had been practicing the game. It was in a small area. When I say they had a sweat on, they didn't have time to misbehave. They didn't have time to start thinking about other things, because it was constant. And my job was to manage the environment. So little things like only 1 ball on the pitch at one time. If the ball got kicked off, we're not going to go and get that ball. We're going to use these balls here to keep the intensity, keep the ball rolling, keep the interaction. And so, like I said, that was me on Saturday morning. And it's still a game of football. It's still a halfway line and 2 goals, with an offside rule. And the game is the game. And then it's how you want to impose that on your players is obviously your personal preference.
Yeah, for sure. And look, such a good example of, even under 9s, that principle, practice design that luckily for you and through your experience is in your head. But knowing that go to, right, I've got an odd number, got 7 players plus a goalkeeper, 1 goal. How can I get them playing, learning, and developing the things that are linked to a very clear game model, rather than, as you mentioned, stood in 2 lines? I think probably to summarize, Dan, and I'll always try and end this question really, because I suppose both of us are privileged, you in particular, around your career you've had and where you are. But if you could go back in time and give a long way back in time, an 18-year-old Dan Micciche starting out in his coaching journey, a top tip and some advice, what would you tell a young Dan at the start of his coaching journey?
Probably to be, I'm using the word in a positive way about being obsessive. And the reason I say that is the game shifts so much. A lot of the game has stayed as it was, but there are a lot of bright minds in this industry, and I include the players in that. And the more we can be dedicated to this, because we have got their careers in our hands. And often players are fortunate for the person they come across, or maybe unfortunate, that one person. And as we know, there's some professional footballers who, if it wasn't for football, God knows where they'd be in their life, never mind in football. So it's not just helping them have a career in football, it's giving them something in life. And then as a byproduct of that, it helps them to become a better person. And being obsessive isn't just watching tactics, it's being dedicated to them, being there for them, as if you like a parent, a friend, a safeguarding officer, you know, that shoulder to cry on, that critical friend, giving them tough love, you know, being their biggest supporter.
Yeah.
And you know, I think it's being there at all cost, really, because a lot of this isn't it isn't the spectacle that people think it is. It's a bit like with players, you know, they'll see Messi on YouTube and think, oh, it's amazing being a footballer, look at the cars they drive. But actually we know that to get there is incredibly hard, and for a lot of footballers they have scars, and it is tough, and they don't earn as much as that, and they have bad injuries, and they maybe have financial problems or marital problems or health problems, and there is a dark side to this. And you know, a lot of what we do is long hours, it is unsociable hours, it is hopefully what you've seen there, early starts. You know, a lot of what you've seen today doesn't just appear. And what I haven't shown you there is the cutting room floor. You know, Spielberg says, don't look at my films, look at the cutting room floor. That's the process. All the drafts that go in the bin, but they're part of the of getting there. And we're never there. You know, it will always, if we're sat here talking in 5 years' time and I'm showing you the same slides, I've not been true to myself, you know, and I've not continued to evolve. So I think whether it's obsessive, Mark, or dedicated or evolving, you know, it's a constant, and it's unconditional.
Yeah.
Whether they're going to play at the top, or whether they're going to play lower leagues, or whether they're not going to play at all, you know, because I think some of my best work are with boys that aren't playing professional football at all. And I take great pride in that so many of them we keep in contact, and I'm proud of them all, whether they're a school teacher, whether they play in the Premier League, or, you know, whether they've got a wife and 3 kids. You know, the main thing is that we can look at each other and go, when we work together, you gave me your best, and we've got some incredible memories from it, because some of this is uncontrollable.
Yeah, for sure.
They can't control the variables that gets them there. But as long as we gave them, you know, I've got a saying, 100% or nothing. So we're either in it or we're not. You know, we're not half-hearted with it. When I had to do that warm-up on Saturday, I had to give it 100%. I wasn't there just babysitting. I was going to give them 100% for those 10 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, so I would probably summarize it like that. It's 100% or nothing.
Yeah. No, look, I mean, yeah, so many top tips, and probably like we've gone full circle, really, that one of those big learnings at the start was the keeping up with modern trends, constantly evolving, and the reminder at the end to continue to do that. So look, Dan, I mean, it's very rarely we get the chance to get an insight into some of the work that goes on at that elite level. So we can't thank you enough, really, for sharing the videos, the slides, the information, and obviously all your interpretation of it, because that's what makes it come alive. So thanks so much for sharing it all. There'll be so many people who've taken their own little bit from this talk and made it applicable for wherever they're working, whether that be at the elite end, grassroots space, female, male game, pro or amateur. So all we can say is thank you so much, mate. Super appreciated. And we're looking forward to seeing what's next for you and your coaching journey.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for everybody who listened, and hopefully you got something out of it. Take care.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dan. And for everyone else, we're looking forward to another coach talk next week. So keep an eye on our social media channels, because we're looking forward to meeting another coach working this time stateside in the youth sector and having a similar conversation we've had tonight. Thanks again, and we'll see you all soon.